Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask Father Rob, where you send your questions in to me, Father Rob Baldwin of St. James Episcopal Church in Piqua, Ohio, and I answer them here on the air. Today's question comes from a member of this congregation who said, when I read the letters of Paul, such as his letter to the Galatians or the Corinthians, he always seems to be addressing problems or challenges that the congregations are facing. And she asked, what kind of challenges did the early church face, and how does that relate to us today in the church? Now, it's a complicated question, because Paul's letters, even though we read them in every church across the country and across the world as part of our corpus of Scripture, were actually letters written to specific churches that were facing different issues. And in fact, Paul's relationship with the churches is different. He might get along really well with one church, say the church in Galatia, while on the other hand might be really critical of another church, like the church in Corinth. But even though they were specific letters written to specific churches, they often addressed issues that were common to all churches in the early period of Christianity, and perhaps common to us as well. At the foremost, of course, was the fact that sometimes these early churches, without a long tradition of doctrine and belief, would sometimes get distracted or seduced into doctrines that were not what they should be getting into. Part of this was because of the fact that unlike churches today where you have a single pastor who's educated in a seminary, who works with a church every single day of their lives, instead what you had were churches based in people's homes where you might have an authority figure, such as Paul, go from church to church to church, like the circuit riders of the early American church. Now, the thing is, though, is that there would be other circuit riders, other people who would go from church to church, also instructing the congregations on what to think, and sometimes their teaching was not something that Paul agreed with. For example, Paul relates that there were individuals going around who were saying that Christians had to observe all the Jewish laws and customs, something that Paul did not agree with, or that Christians needed to be circumcised as adults, something that Paul did not agree with, or that Christians needed to be perfect in every way, something that Paul did not agree with. He believed that we were perfected through the love of Jesus Christ and his perfection, not through our own actions. Some even believe that you could do whatever you want to with your bodies, live licentious lives, because it was only the Spirit that mattered. Paul certainly did not agree with that. And so some of the letters are his counter-arguments to teaching that other people have been saying to these congregations he's involved with. Now, certainly another issue that was facing the early church was persecution. We think about churches being persecuted with images of Christians being thrown to the lions or spending their lives in prison. But a lot of the time in the early church, persecution was not quite that intense, but was present. Christians might not be allowed to hold public office or purchase property or have, sort of harassment occur, not the sort of extreme martyrdom that we sometimes associate, although Paul himself was arrested and eventually martyred because of his faith. Now, here in today's Christian church, we do find ourselves occasionally dealing with people who are not going from church to church to church, but are now using the new communication venues open to spread ideas about Christianity that are just not true. A litmus test for me always is, does their teaching, does the thrust of their word speak to me of the love that God has for me, for God's church, and for the whole world? And I think this is a love that you can identify very easily in the teaching of Jesus and his life. If it does not speak to me of love, if it speaks to me of hatred, of intolerance, of cruelty, then we're getting ourselves into some bad teaching under the guise of Christianity. Now, persecution is a whole other matter. There are places in the world in which Christians are actively persecuted, harassed, beaten, imprisoned, and yes, even killed. In fact, there are some statistics that suggest the 20th century saw more Christian martyrs than any other century in Christian history. Here in the United States, we don't suffer that kind of intense persecution. In fact, I believe we suffer from something much more insidious, a lack of persecution. Let me tell you what I mean. Instead of having the decision to become a Christian one in which has a major impact on your life, may influence your ability to take care of your family or to own a home or to live freely or to even live at all. Instead, we have the decision to go to church or not go to church, participate in our faith or not participate in our faith, with little to no real impact from the outside world about that. As a result, I think we're lured into a sort of lackadaisical sense of security, where we don't feel like we pay a heavy price for our Christianity, and as a result, it doesn't have much value to us. It's a very seductive situation for American Christians, because I think it speaks to one of the reasons why you find in communities where there is a lot of persecution, a lot of Christians. But here in the United States, where there isn't any persecution, you don't have a lot. I'm not saying we should be persecuted for our faith. I'm not endorsing that notion at all. I don't wish people were kicking in my door of my house and hauling me off to prison for being a Christian. But I'm just acutely aware of the insidious quality to American life where people of faith don't necessarily feel that there's a lot of personal stake in whether or not they are a Christian or not a Christian. And I find that to be, at times, a troubling quality to the world around us. I'd like to thank you all for a great question. You can send your question to me here at Ask Father Rob at St. James Episcopal Church, 200 West High Street, Piqua, that's Piqua, Ohio, 45356. You can email your question to me at stjamespiqua, stjamespiqua, yahoo.com. And now you can find your favorite episodes of Ask Father Rob on the internet. Just go to youtube.com and type in Ask Father Rob. Father is FR period, so it's Ask Father Rob, and see lots of back episodes of Ask Father Rob where I answer your questions here on the air. Keep sending in those great questions, and I look forward to seeing you here next week.